And okay, we started recording here. Let me see. Um, I'm going to do a little bit of housekeeping. The seminar will be in webinar format, so we'll be recording some of the things, and we'll put them available, the links on the IT student chapter website. Potentially, this could be shared with other websites, so just let you know. We have a new time slots because of between classes, some of the students are on campus and they want to give them extra time to move around. So we went from our 3:30 time slot to the 4:30 time slot. And also, in terms of pizzas, you'll have to make it yourself. I've been making all kinds of things since COVID, since March, and gained a lot of weight. So it's very exciting. Um, we traditionally, this seminar is associated and even sponsored by civil engineering, by CTR Translation Center, and by the center, the Caesar Center. But I'm going to put their signs, their logos here, but since they're not buying pizza this time, I'm a little bit hesitant. And next week we have a special seminar that Chris Cox is going to have a special talk with all our students because of the COVID situation. So I'll give you more information on that. But today we have a guest, Dr. Kurte. And you can see that I already sent out the flyer, and you probably joined because you click on the link over there on the right side. And he's going to talk about some of the complex problems in the urban system and using data-driven approaches. I'm just reading his title basically because I'm here to learn what's going on. And I'm especially interested in his use of supercomputers and all that. I really appreciate Dr. Chen Liu introduced me to Dr. Kurte, and Dr. Liu is here also. And you should also look at his biography. Basically, he graduated from IIT. Those of you in the knows that IIT is a very strong school in India. I remember when I was doing PhD, sitting at the international table, having dinner with also someone from IIT, I think Madras at that time. So they're talking about the GRE, and they said, yeah, I get a 2380. I didn't get 2400 because of this and that. I was ashamed, and I was like, wow, these people are amazing. I don't know if you know GRE back then. It's 800, 800, 800, and total scores at 2400 is very hard. So this is a very strong school. And Kuldeep got his PhD in 2018, and then 2017 and 2018 he came to Oak Ridge National Lab as postdoc, and now he is a research scientist in the Computational Urban Sciences group. So he has worked on several projects, and I've asked him to share some of the experience and some of the projects he worked on, and then digging deeper into some of the things that he would share with us. Again, you can see this the logos here with the IT student chapter and then WTS chapter. Okay, so with no further delay, I'm going to stop sharing here and then let Dr. Kurte to start his talk.
All right.
There
Thank
he is.
you. Thank you for that kind introduction, Dr. Lee. Let me share my screen. Okay. All right. Is the screen visible?
Yes, yes.
Awesome. Uh, Good afternoon, all of you. I'm Kuldeep Kurte. I'm research scientist at Oak Ridge National Lab. My group name is Computational Urban Sciences. First of all, I would like to thank Dr. Lee for inviting me. I would also like to thank Cheng Liu for introducing me to Dr. Lee, and this is a great opportunity for me to present my work in front of you guys. So I'm not from a transportation background, so please don't hesitate me in correcting if I mention any wrong terminology. I would love to hear more about it. Okay. So before we begin, let me introduce to you my group, Computational Urban Sciences. So Dr. Jibo Sanyal is a group leader, and we are fairly new group. However, we have unique combination of different expertise. So as name says, it's a computational urban sciences group. So we have people from HPC computational background. We have people from climate who work on urban climate, weather. Then we have uh, econometrics transportation. Then we have visualization expert. So Srinath was our transportation expert. He recently joined Berkeley Lab. So and we have a very strong team of data scientists. My role within the group um, is to use or apply machine learning or data driven approaches or application of high performance computing for different complex urban problems. Um, So this is the group's mission. So since our group is new, so I thought it would be nice to just showcase the group's mission. So we want to conduct a basic science and applied R&D to discover new insights, develop new methods, tools, and then using data science and computational approaches with the specific focus on complex interaction between different urban systems. And we want to do that from local to the global scale. So we want to do a big impact kind of work in that space. These are few capabilities and the work that we do as a CUSG group. So I have highlighted, so we have expertise in modeling and simulation, then machine learning, AI, specific capability on data science and visualization. So I have highlighted some of our work that we did in the area of transportation. So for example, agent-based modeling, both at macro and micro scale, mode choices, econometrics. Then similarly, we applied machine learning and AI kind of techniques for this transportation domain. And we do have a big project going on called regional mobility. Um, uh, right now, it is the area of interest of that project is Chattanooga. So we have been collaborating with the UT Chattanooga and city. So that's a very good project. It's a big project. It involves transportation, visualization, data analytics, geospatial analytics, and other techniques. Okay, so with that brief introduction about my group, let's start with today's talk. So in the beginning, in the title, as well as in our group's mission, I mentioned about complex urban systems. So let's begin with that. Um, so as a typical day, we wake up in our home, we take a breakfast, then maybe if you have kid, then you go walk to the bus stop so that they can catch bus to school, and then we commute to another building, which may be our office or university or lab for our work. During afternoon break, we go to maybe cafeteria or restaurant to grab our lunch. Then after working hours, we go back to our home. Maybe on the way back to our home, we grab grocery, or maybe we can go to gym, swimming. Um, so this is a typical day, if you can imagine, in everyone's life. So wherever you are in this entire cycle, you use energy in terms of, say, computers, you use lights, we do cooking. So yeah, now imagine modeling this energy, maybe not at the person level, but at the entire city level. So as a part of urban exascale computing project, we were concerned about um, using understanding this energy usage at the city scale. So that was our main objective in that project. So now we have an intuition about this complex urban system. So let's get a little bit more detail about this. So in this slide, I tried to showcase this complex urban system in terms of block diagram. So various blocks represent these different systems in the urban environment. So the systems could be transportation, socioeconomic activities, which has a lot of human behavior kind of angle. Then we have building energy, we have urban atmosphere, and then you can see there are few arrows between these different systems. So these arrows essentially represents various exchanges that happens between these systems. So for example, if you consider say building energy and urban atmosphere, then the exchanges from building energy could be, say, emission or heat emissions from the buildings, and maybe the exchange from the urban atmosphere system to building system could be, say, different air pressure, water, moisture, and heat. So similarly, we can see that from transportation to building system, we have, say, arrival and departure of different of people to the building and from the building. And similarly, there is no evident feedback from building energy system to transportation. Then we have system urban atmosphere, where we exchange weather with the transportation, and then transportation impacts atmosphere through emission. So there are these different interesting exchanges. Okay, so this figure may not be a comprehensive figure, but it gives us sufficient information on how this complexity looks like in the urban system. So in urban ECB project, we evaluated the aspects of weather, socioeconomic factor, and building energy. Now, if you want to study this phenomena at city level, we tend to use simulation tools. So we know that for most of these systems, there are simulation tools available. For example, transients for the transportation, energy plus for the building energy simulation. So usually these simulation tools assume ideal situation. Now, for example, clear weather or general occupancy for the buildings. But we know that if we actually want to understand the realistic behavior and want to simulate a realistic behavior, then we might need little bit more information, which is a sufficient representative of the reality. So it's not always good idea to use, say, clear weather when you try to simulate transportation simulation, or just use a static building occupancy schedule when you try to simulate building energy. So in this talk, I will mostly focus on how we can leverage capability of data-driven and machine learning kind of approaches um, to um, to understand and analyze these various exchanges that are happening between these different models, different systems. Um, so that we can generate sufficient realistic scenario for our simulation. So for example, in this particular talk, I will be mostly focusing on this kind of exchange, and I'll be focusing on transportation and building energy system. So there will be some exchanges from the transportation system to building energy, and there will be some exchanges, few exchanges from say urban atmosphere, but I'll not talk mostly about urban atmosphere in terms of simulation, but there will be some exchanges from the atmosphere and to the atmosphere from transportation. So that will be the scope of today's presentation. Okay, so I broadly divided this talk in three parts. So as I mentioned, I will talk about our work on analyzing a regional scale impact of inclement weather on transportation system. Then I will talk about our work on developing a mobility-driven approach to modeling building energy. So in this second part, we will I will discuss the exchange between transportation and building energy, and then towards the end, I will discuss about our work on developing a large-scale transportation simulation capability, which can be used for running several transportation simulation scenarios in a reasonable time on supercomputing facility like Titan. Okay, so let's begin with the first part of this talk. So as I mentioned here, I will be talking about our work on analyzing a regional scale impact of weather, specifically inclement weather, I should say, on the transportation system. Okay, so let me begin with few numbers. According to US Department of Transportation, the causes of traffic congestion can be broadly classified into three categories: environmental cause, mechanical cause, and human infrastructure. Um, so if you see in the right corner, so 15% traffic congestions are caused due to bad weather. 25% are caused due to traffic incidents. However, out of this 25%, 24% traffic incidents happen during bad weather. So, which definitely showcase that there is a significant impact that weather, a significant role that weather plays in this traffic flow and this traffic congestion. So, it is definitely important to understand and analyze this impact in greater detail. So here on this slide, I just put a few news feeds that I extracted from internet just to showcase how uh, im- this inclement weather impacts the traffic flow. So for example, this underline feed says most of Monday's rain fell between 5 a.m. and 8 a.m., causing several traffic crashes. So definitely traffic incidents. And this little guy explains that you may expect a poor driving condition, especially during Friday morning commute. So it talks about the driving conditions and it will be degraded due to rainfall. Similarly, this news talks about there is an expected rainfall, and as an effect, roadways, you will experience slick roadways with a slow commute possible during the morning and evening rush hours. So we all experience that. We know that. So as I mentioned, we understand that during this inclement weather, drivers tends to drive slowly, more cautiously, and sometimes when the traffic volume is same, that affects the traffic flow. So, for example, if you drive slowly below the average speed, then maybe vehicles spend more time on road that could cause traffic congestion. So there are in literature people have tried to address this issue. So these are few literature that I have listed which talks about analyzing impact of different inclement weather scenarios on the various traffic characteristics. So what we found that most of the studies were carried out for a specific corridor or a freeway segment. But we know that the weather as well as traffic flow is vary both geographically as well as temporally. Even if you consider a commuter's trip, usually that entire trip consists of different facility types. For example, freeway, collector, arterials, and that entire trip uh, passes through various neighborhoods. For example, urban, non-urban. So here I have given a snapshot of my usual trip to Oak Ridge. So I usually take I-40 for first 15 minutes, for example, and then I take exit, and then I take Pellissippi Highway, then I take exit, then I take Bethel Valley. So I usually take like I-40 interstate and then highway followed by collector type of road. And initially my neighborhood is mostly I would say surrounded by commercial area. Then there are few other commercial areas, but as soon as I get on the Pellissippi, there are few mixed type of land use, commercial as well as non-commercial. Um, so the intent is, if you consider a commuter's trip, it takes different facility types as well as it goes through different neighborhoods. So when we try to understand this impact of weather, so we plan to use these two impacts together in our analysis. So for example, we plan to include the different facility types, different road types, and then we also plan to include different land use, which could influence the traffic flow in the nearby road segment. So please feel free to chime in and ask questions. I'm happy to answer. So as I mentioned that we decided to combine the effect of weather as well as land use on the traffic speed. The area that we selected was the city of Chicago because that was we decided in the project. So this slide basically shows the study area and various data sets that we used for this analysis. So for weather, we used API called Dark Sky API to download the data. So weather data was available for every 1 hour. So it's weather, uh, average hourly weather, I should say. So that time, I think when we use this data, that time Dark Sky used to provide data uh, freely. It had some limits, but we could download the data. But now that company was acquired by, I think, Apple, and due to this new agreement, Dark Sky do not provide this data freely. But I think if you want to download weather data, this study is independent of the source of data. This Darksky API also use data from National Weather Services, and they had their own recipes and few data cleaning stuff, which basically cleans the data and provide in more regular format. So, but we can definitely use data provided by NOAA and the National Weather Services. Then we used speed data. So for that, we got data from NPM RDS by US FHWA. So this data also was available at 15 minutes granularity, but I think we used, so this is, uh, but we used data for, I think, average hourly vehicle speed data. So both weather data and speed data are at hourly resolution. And as I mentioned that we want to study how these different businesses impacts the um, uh, traffic flow on the nearby road segment. So we used land use data, which was provided by Chicago Metropolitan Agency and Planning. So they basically publishes this land use data, and they use this data for their own land use planning as well as transportation research. So this is how the entire data set looks like. And this slide shows few statistics and the characteristics of the data. Um, yeah. So this slide shows the methodology that we use to understand the impact of inclement weather on traffic flow and how that impact varies geographically, and why it is important to capture this spatio-temporal variation in this impact. So at first we basically obtained, as I explained, we obtained traffic data from NPM RDS. Then, so the NPM RDS data is available at the county level. So we had to extract links which are within the city. Then we got weather data. Since we want to understand, is there any impact of microclimate? So what we did, we basically used this 24 weather locations which are um, regularly spaced and sufficiently covers entire city. So for these 24 weather locations, we downloaded the weather data for the year 2017. Now, since we have traffic data and then weather data, so what we did, we associated link to each link to the nearest weather location. So, for example, for this particular link, this is the nearest weather location. So we had that association ready for the further analysis. And so since we have now traffic data, then weather data. So to understand the land use impact, we downloaded the CMAP land use data for Chicago. So this land use data has around 20 or more than 20 land use categories, but we did not want that much granularity in the land use. So we used three. So we basically generalized those categories under three categories: urbanized residential area, urbanized non-residential area, which basically includes commercial, businesses, and so on, and then non-urbanized area. So we classified into the broad categories. And the next step, then we try to combine um, the link information or the traffic information with the land use. So what we did here is we try to classify the different links in the network based on link type and based on the um, dominant land use category, which we think could impact the traffic flow in that link. So I'll be talking more about that process in the next slide. So we'll postpone that discussion until next slide. Um, then, as I mentioned, weather is important aspect in this study. So but then again, understanding type of weather for that particular geography is very important. So what we did, although we downloaded the data, we used a unsupervised machine learning approach called self-organizing map to classify and identify different weather patterns. So weather patterns could be different for different regions. So I'll be talking about it in the subsequent slide about how we use these SOM and machine learning approach for weather classification. Okay, so now we have classified or categorized links based on link type as well as the land use, dominant land use, influencing land use, and then we have weather information, and that is also classified. So now everything is in same temporal resolution. So speed data is also available at hourly scale, as well as weather data is also available at the hourly scale. So now data is prepared in the complete integrated form. And after that, we perform few significant testing to understand whether the traffic pattern for a given link type, for a given weather class is statistically different, is significantly different than other category or not. And then we try to come up with the typical diurnal distribution of the average vehicle speed for these different link categories. Okay, so let me give you a little bit more information about the classification of the link, because that is the crux of this entire study. Uh, why I'm saying that? Because it tries to capture the spatial variations. So the spatial variation is in terms of in terms of the effect or the influence that the dominant land use or the businesses can have in the nearby links. So as I mentioned in the previous slide, that in the CMAP land use data we have um, we have more than 20 categories, but then we generalize them in these three categories: urbanized residential, urbanized non-residential, and non-urbanized area. And also in the road network, we have links of type freeways, collectors, and arterials. So when we combine this, we obtained 9 different link categories. So we have URF, URA, URC. So for example, URF means urbanized residential freeways. So those link are of type freeways whose traffic flow could be influenced by urbanized residential area. So that is the interpretation of this particular link category. So likewise, we have other 9 categories which we use to classify all these links. So this classification tried to capture link type as well as the dominant land use influence at the same time. So this plot basically shows this classification according to these 9 different categories. So this different color coding shows different link categories. Okay. So that was about link classification. But again, as I mentioned, we used weather data, and we wanted to understand the uh, weather categories in that particular area. So we used all these weather data from all 24 locations that we selected, and we tried to group them in different categories. So for that, we used unsupervised machine learning approach called self-organizing map. um, so what it tries to do is it's a visual analytic approach. It maps a multi-dimensional data points to a two-dimensional map, which is useful for visualizing. One of the output of the SOM is something like this, which is called as a codes plot. And this 2D area is called as a SOM space, where each circle represents SOM node. So these are the SOM's terminology. But in basics, if you see this uh, single node, it represents a specific characteristics of the weather. So here we used 4 different weather variables. So temperature, precipitation, wind speed, visibility. So these are the weather parameters or the variables we obtained from weather data. So so if you pick one particular SOM node, there you can find what is the dominant weather variable. So that's how we can interpret this plot. Now, once we have learned this particular SOM space, we can obtain mean representation of these variables, and then we can perform some kind of clustering to further obtain more broad and general weather categories. So we used k-means kind of clustering approach to obtain broad weather categories. So we came up with 5 clusters, and then we labeled them according to the characteristics of these weather variables. So for example, this blue circles or these SOM nodes represents good weather. So uh, visibility is good, temperature is also normal, there is no precipitation, wind speed is also okay. Then we have these violet circles, this cluster, this represents low visibility. Similarly, we have this red one, which represents higher rainfall. and then it is surrounded by this green cluster, which represents moderate rainfall. Later, we combine this cluster just as a rainfall. So for example, if you see this visibility plot, so here I plotted mean as well as the variation of these weather variables for all these five categories. So here, if you see cluster 5, the mean visibility is low. So that's why we rename that cluster as a low visibility cluster. So similarly, we have renamed or categorized these different clusters into different weather class. Okay, so that was our approach to classify that weather. So now we have, so if you try to recall from the beginning, so now we have collected data, speed information as well as weather information. Both are at hourly time scale. Speed information, we further classified each link into different categories based on its type as well as the land use type. And then we join that data with the weather information, which is now classified or categorized in different weather categories. So entire data frame is ready for further analysis. So what we did here is we performed a few statistical analysis. So here I tried to present cumulative distribution for all these 9 categories. So each of this plot, for example, URF, which is urbanized residential freeways, and these different colors represents the cumulative density for different types of weather. So we can clearly see that for most of these categories, distribution is different. And we have seen similar evidence in our statistical analysis also. So which basically says it is really important to understand this understand the increment, how inclement weather impacts the traffic flow in terms of say average hourly traffic speed, and then how that impact varies across geography, that is spatially as well as temporally. So this gave us good evidence to further pursue that idea. So here I tried to, so what we did, so since entire data set is available, what we did here is for each of this category, for example, urbanized residential freeway, we then try to obtain the diurnal profile of the average hourly traffic speed. So, and that to be for different weather categories. So if you see, so here I have only shown the for freeway, but if you see here, most of the time, whenever there is a rainfall, we have seen the significant reduction in the average pattern, average traffic pattern, speed pattern. So here in the first graph where urbanized residential area influences freeway, that kind of category, we observed two peaks. But in case of freeways which are influenced by urbanized non-residential areas like commercial buildings or businesses, we have observed a significant peak only, which is during evening time. There was not very much significant peak during morning time. Similarly, at the for the freeways which are influenced by non-urbanized areas such as say agriculture, barren land, or unused lands, for them, for there also, I think we have observed one peak, but that is not that much significant as compared to the first plot. But there was a peak for the evening time. Um, uh, the interesting thing about this third plot is we have observed the speed reduction due to rainfall as well as due to low visibility. So low visibility also impacts the average traffic speed for this particular category of links. So those were our observations, and um, uh, so from this study we found that if congestion on freeway reduces reduces the average vehicle speed below a particular threshold, say 45 miles per hour, then according to this graph, CO2 emission increases. so which also is an indicator of more fuel consumption. So these kind of insights are helpful in understanding how much is the fuel consumption, how much is the emission during say inclement weather. So yeah, so now we have analyzed that data. So this slide shows some of our initial results on attempting on modeling average hourly traffic speed using by considering weather, land use as well as link type information together, and then we try to build a neural network as a regressor. Um, so this work was basically carried out by one of my Suli intern, Jeong Park. So Oak Ridge National Lab has a internship program called Suli. So undergraduate student comes there for spend 2 months or perform some research. So this was the one of the outcomes, and we found decent accuracy in both training as well as validation loss. Okay, so one important thing I want to highlight that we found that there is a significant impact of different weather patterns. Mostly it is precipitation as well as low visibility on average hourly traffic speed. And that also varies geographically, which we could understand through uh, use of these different land use categories. So definitely there is a scope to improve this methodology. uh, we actually really scratch the surface on understanding this impact. So what's next? So one potential usefulness of this is the outcome as well as the insights can be used to generate more realistic transportation simulation scenarios. So instead of just considering clear day, we can consider impact of say heavy rainfall or maybe high visibility and maybe combined impact sometimes. Or if we consider snowfall, then we can definitely include snowfall into it. And then we can try to tweak a few internal parameters like permission probability and those kind of thing. Of course, more work need to do in that area. But this will be helpful to generate sufficiently realistic scenarios which could capture the impact of weather on the traffic. Okay, so that was about the exchange between transportation and weather, urban weather. So now let's move on to the next part. So if anyone has question, then I would love to answer before we move on the next part of the talk. Or else we can definitely take questions towards that.
I think
Can I ask
Steve has
a
question.
simple question?
Yes.
Go ahead.
Yeah. Could you show us the figure showing the classification of weather?
Sure. Okay, let me go back a few slides. Yeah.
Yeah, this one. You have the 5 categories of the weather.
Yes.
And my simple question is, how about the weather with both wind and rainfall at the same time? I
Yes.
guess.
Yeah, definitely. Because we usually observe that kind of situation, right? Where we have rainfall as well as high wind. So, so in this particular data, we use only 1 year of data. I guess for the kind of insights that you're looking for, we might need to include few years of data. Then those kind of patterns will naturally emerge. But I think in here we have seen moderate rainfall categories along with the high wind. So there are few SOM nodes which indicates the scenario that you're mentioning. So definitely we can definitely further make more granularity in this classification, and that will be definitely useful. The only thing is we might need more data, more traffic data to be used um, to get good insights on how high wind as well as rainfall has a combined effect on, say, average hourly traffic speed. So that can definitely be extended to this new category.
Thank you.
Sure.
Let's keep moving then. Thank you.
Okay. So let yeah. So let's uh, discuss about the second part of this talk. So as I mentioned in the earlier part of this talk, I talked about the exchanges, um, a particular type of exchange that happens between transportation system and the urban weather, and how we can leverage a data-driven kind of approach to basically analyze it and then maybe useful for generating sufficiently realistic simulation scenario. So in this part of this talk, I will talk about um, a mobility driven approach to modeling building energy. So in this part, I will try to capture exchange between transportation and building energy. Um, so this work was led by my colleague, Dr. Anne Beres. I put her contact here and I was part of that effort. So this entire talk was the part of Urban ECP. Okay, so there are various inputs that needs when you try to simulate building energy and the performance of the building in terms of energy. So one of the important parameter is the how occupancy pattern looks like, how the diurnal distribution of the occupancy for a particular building. So usually um, um, uh, simulations like Energy Plus considers a static and identical occupancy, identical for all the buildings in the study area, for example. So, I mean, which is not that much representative, right? So in this work, what we do, we developed a methodology to generate a dynamic occupancy schedule using transients output. So our hypothesis is that, so depending on transient simulation, so suppose you have set up a transient simulation for weather and you've made few parameters tweaking based on weather condition, and now you simulate your simulation. So based on that particular scenario, vehicle arrival as well as departure time will vary definitely. So that will definitely change this building occupancy pattern. It could basically reduce, it could basically shift this pattern, it can be anything. So we try to capture that, that pattern so that we can generate more dynamic and intuitive occupancy schedule. So that was the main objective of this exercise. So this is the entire coupling workflow. So by this time, you must have understood that we are talking about transportation as well as building energy simulation. So there has to be some coupling. So this is the entire coupling workflow. So this first part basically represents the transients execution. So basically we set up a simulation. Then we execute that simulation, and as an output, one of the outputs is vehicle coordinates and the location. So we use that output, process it, and then for each vehicle or each agent, we have, say, when was the time when we see that vehicle first time in the network, when was the last time when we see that in the that same vehicle in the network. So we try to identify those kind of characteristics for each vehicle, and then we somehow try to assign with some method, with the proposed method, we try to assign those agents or vehicles to the building, so that we can basically generate the occupancy schedule for that building. So this was the summary of this entire workflow. Okay, so this is how on the left side I've shown the typical output looks like, how it looks like, the typical transients output. In the tabular format, it has driver's ID or vehicle ID, for example. Then we have timestamp, then we have location information. So what we are doing, we are using this output from the transients, and then we have a building footprint information. Both are the spatial information, and then we are trying to use some spatial data processing approach to map these different agents to these buildings. So so basically that will be helpful for us to then develop a dynamic schedule for each and every building, and it is not required to use static occupancy for all the buildings. So it will give us fairly representative scenario for the occupancies of the buildings. Okay, so this is the approach that we used. So as I mentioned that the task here is to assign these different vehicle locations or vehicles or agents to these different buildings. So in this plot on the right side, um, so let me give you a little bit few numbers on how many agents were there. So we had like 460 agents. That was based on the population map that we used. Then total 120K buildings in the Chicago, and then there were few buildings in the Chicago loop area. Um, so in this right side of the slide, if you carefully see those dots, yellow dots, those represents vehicle locations, and these blue footprints, those are the building footprints. So the approach that we used is called as a quad tree uh, algorithm, which basically divides, it's a spatial partitioning approach. It recursively divides the space into small parts until a particular criteria is met. So we kept a criteria of few buildings and few agents should be in the specific partition, such that it should also satisfy the building's capacity. So there is a capacity number associated with each building. So with that criteria, we try to subdivide this quad tree algorithm, try to subdivide this space. So for example, as an output, you will get, depending on the number of buildings actual capacity, and the total number of agents nearby that building, the size of the partition will vary. Sometime you will get a bigger partition, sometime depending on the density of the vehicles and the density of the buildings, you will get more granular partition. So as you go in the heart of the city, maybe you will see more granular partitions. So that was briefly about the approach. So now once we have this assignment, we can definitely come up with the building occupancy schedule. So this reasoning behind using quad tree is quite fast. It's a spatial partitioning recursive approach. Without quad tree, if you want to do say comparisons and then try to individually try to assign these agents with the to the buildings, then there are more than 137 millions of comparisons. So, but using quad tree kind of space partitioning approach, we could able to perform this task within few minutes. So that's good. So there are various other approaches like R-tree is a spatial indexing approach. We can use that approach also. There is another approach called nearest neighbor. But again, the important constraint is we need to satisfy the building capacity, and also the time is also important factor there. So as I mentioned, we used the output and then we came up with the occupancy schedule. So on the right side of this slide, I am again showing the typical static building occupancy, and the orange line shows the occupancy that was obtained using the experiment we did and method that we proposed. So it is more or less same, but there are a few mismatch. This dip in this afternoon time, maybe it is a representation of the afternoon lunch break, and that's why it is there is a dip in the building occupancy. But we have not considered that scenario in the simulation, so that's why it could not capture that thing. But that's fine. It at least gave us an initial evidence that the proposed method can be used to basically couple this transportation as well as building energy simulation, and then try to overcome or try to obtain the dynamic building occupancy, which will be basically useful for understanding energy efficiency of that building in a better way. So here I'm showing the percentage energy use. So this orange bar shows the energy used for different types of activity using the building occupancy that we generated, and this blue one was using the static occupancy that we used, that we regularly use. So there is a mismatch. So that definitely there is, that means we need to definitely try to consider this kind of approach to obtain the building occupancy. Um, of course, we understand that validation is needed for this approach, but at least it gave us a way to um, um, obtain a way to develop a dynamic occupancy schedule, which can be useful for realistic energy performance estimation. So that was about the energy. That was about the exchanges between, say, transportation system and building energy system. So um, so now we move on to the third part. So till now we have seen two use case applications of data-driven approaches to obtain realistic simulation setup by analyzing or processing various exchanges between either transportation simulation with weather or transportation simulation with, say, building energy. Now, during urban ECP project, we also dealt with the problem of developing a capability that enable executing several thousands of, say, simulation scenarios in parallel, and that to be in a reasonable time. So that was also one of the asks in the project. Um, so for the visual depiction, I put this figure. So this is how the vehicle movements look like visually. So we use land scan data to generate the population, and then we have in-house utility called terms. So we use this, and this terms utility enable the setup of the scenario for the simulation. So we use this utility for this particular exercise. Again, along with that, we also need a typical travel behavior and commute pattern. So we used National Household Travel Survey to obtain that. So there is one input file which basically transient stakes, which represents percentage volume in the diurnal form. So we use this data to fetch to obtain the travel behavior for the Chicago region. And we ran that. So basically, first we set up transients on Titan, which was a old machine. So we had few challenges there, but then we overcome those challenges, and we could successfully run transients on Titan. But that was only on one single node. But now our target was to develop a capability to basically run multiple scenarios. So this is something we tried to envision. On the left side, I'm showing one framework. Maybe some part of that framework could feel you could feel like hypothetical. So for example, in the bottom, suppose you have acquisition of weather data, maybe current weather or forecasted weather. So based on that weather information, we can basically simulate different scenarios. And now basically, once we have all these scenarios, then we can use this scenario and we can parallelly execute all these scenarios on supercomputing like facility like Titan. So for this, we used a tool called Swifty. It's developed by Argonne National Lab. It's actually a massive scale parallel job execution workflow. Actually, it was developed for the transients like legacy simulation tools. So we could set up that on the Titan, and we ran few experiments. So we executed 7 scenarios, 300 scenarios, thousands or 3,000s of scenarios. And then we also tried with different configurations. So for example, since the transient 4 was single threaded, we used 8 processes per node. That means 8 transients instances on one single node. Then we also tried with 16 instances on the same node. It consumed 23 nodes for 365 simulations, those kind of thing. So the interesting thing is, for few configurations, it executed nicely. But then since this transportation simulation generates data, and if you use more number of processes or the instances of the transients, then it could throttle the network, it could clog the network. So that is something one should consider when we try to execute those mean number of scenarios of these kind of simulations. So so that was the capability that we developed, and I think for thousands of scenarios. So basically, we did not create 1,000 separate scenarios. We replicated one scenario for 1,000 times just to check the capability from HPC point of view. What limit we can push basically. So we could execute say thousands of scenarios for a scale of a Chicago city within 2 hours. It could generate 40 GB of data. So once we have this kind of output, we can summarize it. We can perform some analysis, traffic delay analysis, forecasting of the traffic, those kind of important things. So that was about the third part of this talk. So I pretty much covered about today's talk, but let me show you the references which could be important. I have listed few data sources, and I have also listed few references. Few of our papers related to this work could be useful. I would like to acknowledge Urban Exascale Computing Project, which basically funded, is a DOE funded project program, which funded this entire task. I would like to also acknowledge Oak Ridge Leadership Computing Facility for providing access to Titan. And I would like to thank Cheng Liu for his guidance on using terms. He's basically listening this talk, so he must be happy. Yeah. So yeah, so there are other colleagues, Srinath and Steve Peterson, helped us to perform spatial analysis, and then we also try to used IDOT data. So we also thank to IDOT for providing us the data. So that was about the entire work on the data-driven approaches for this complex interaction of these different systems. So unfortunately, that project ended, and we are still trying to pitch this idea, and we are trying to enhance the work. Let's see how it goes. I would love to collaborate. If there is any potential collaboration, I'd love to discuss more about it. We can definitely have a possibility of solely undergraduate students through Oak Ridge. So that will be one opportunity where we can collaborate.
Oh, thank you very much.
Thank you so much for your attention. Yeah.
Yeah, appreciate that. Usually at this time we have really a round of applause, and everyone have to turn on their speaker in order to clap. But I think there's a reaction thing. You can clap right there, right
Thank
now.
you.
Okay. Yes, you can see that.
Yes.
So we have about 10 minutes left, and I'd like to invite you guys questions. And now that I know Dr. Katak is waiting patiently, usually has questions, and Dr. Cherry might ask about micromobility, that kind of things. So go ahead, you guys.
Okay, yeah, I'll try to answer. Yeah.
Anyone there? Okay, I'll ask the question about transients. The second part of your talk, you have a very comprehensive list of the coupling system. But in the end, I felt you basically use the transients output. So when all this hundreds of thousands of people arrive in each grid area and kind of filter into their buildings, or they don't have to be that accurate. As long as they're in that grid, that quad area, you're fine. So that's throughout the day, particularly in the morning, I guess. And then in the afternoon, they will then reverse. You have OD going back out. So once they leave that area, you really don't care if they're stuck in some freeway somewhere. As long as they're gone, you can start looking at building occupancy issues in those buildings, right?
Yeah.
So wouldn't this setup very much at mercy of the OD that you put into transients? And now a lot of times we really don't know the OD well enough, and OD could fluctuate quite a bit, especially if you have some of the not just work home to work home, and a whole bunch of other people traveling into the area. So how dependent, or what's the sensitivity of this system to OD? If you change your OD by some percentage, how much it will swing your building occupancy analysis?
Yeah, I think as you rightly mentioned, maybe most of the time we don't have proper OD access or proper formulation of the OD. But we haven't tried that modifying OD and try to see how that impacts is. Yeah, I'm not sure how much that will affect, but we would definitely love to I think analyze that. That is really a good question, I would say.
But you do have hourly OD, because you can see your result and that typical kind of a double peak thing. You're shifted earlier a little bit, so you must have some kind of temporal wise more detailed OD. So that's kind of interesting. It's
Yeah,
hard
yeah.
data to get. Yeah. Anyone got questions? It's the first time we're running seminars.
Yeah,
Oh,
so
there,
I'll
Dr.
ask. I'll take the bait that Lee suggested and ask about like short. How does your model handle really short trips that just get swallowed by other simulation models, or me walking to lunch, or that sort of thing? Is there do you handle that sort of those sorts of trips very well with the types of data that you're using, or are you really looking at big flows on the network?
Yeah, I think we for this project, I think we haven't considered those that much granularity of the trip. I guess we mostly considered the long trips kind of thing for this particular analysis.
But do you
So
think,
we
I mean, when you get into like a smaller grid pattern, a smaller grid of trip generation or trip activity generation, do you feel like that's something that your model can assess, or do you think that? And the reason I ask is as they say, what gets modeled or measured gets prioritized or whatever, right? And
yes.
do you feel like your model can handle the sorts of trips that kind of constitute a really large portion of urban trips? Something like
Yeah. So
30 or 50% of trips are less than a couple miles long.
yeah. So are you talking about the quad tree approach that I presented, or
Just in general, yeah.
in general? Okay,
General,
okay.
yeah.
So let me talk from the perspective of the vehicle assignment to the building problem. So as the output, we get the vehicle locations or agent location. So we have ID and the location. So what, as a first step, what we are doing for each unique ID, we are trying to check the its start location and then its end location. So if it, even if it is a short trip, then definitely it will have both of this information, right? So if we have that information, then we will take that last location and then try to assign that particular vehicle or agent to the nearby building. So I think the vehicle to building assignment method could capture those kind of short trips, but I'm not sure from the perspective or from the angle of transient simulations.
Yeah, so Moshe, and I think Moshe is on, I don't know, I'm calling her out, but she might not be on the line. Anyways, the point being is one of my students and I, several of my students have looked at like parcel level trip generation and trying to sort of load up the network at the parcel level. You can often find like a transit stop is located within a quarter or half of a mile to a lot of people, but very few people can actually access that transit stop because of all kinds of barriers. And when you when you get down to that parcel level and the network leading to that parcel, that building, as you say, you might find different things as it relates to pedestrian access or any other thing. So
yes, yes, I think that that's an important point. And from the spatial partitioning perspective, we also tried to maintain one more constraint, which I think I forgot to mention. We tried to maintain the uh, complete building should be within that particular partition.
okay.
So building should not be distributed among different partitions. So that was one more constraint that we used. So yeah.
We actually have Amber's here, and she did chime in. I don't know if she's going to speak for herself, but she did
Yeah,
say that
I
they're
would
looking
love
for more
if she can.
granularity. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
I
I would
saw
love.
her name so many times on the slides. I thought, why didn't we invite her instead? No, but anyway, I'm just kidding. So, Anne, you want to say something?
Sure. Let me actually turn on my video as well. So I don't want to steal Kuldeep's thunder, so I'll keep it.
Go ahead.
So
Yeah.
for transims, it is possible with some pain to make it at that low level. I believe it can actually handle pedestrians also. It definitely can handle buses and bikes. So it's theoretically possible, and we have access to data about, so right now it's all about commute trips, but we have data for all kinds of trips from the National Household Travel Survey, which is hosted by ORNL, so it's nhts.ornl.gov, if you're interested in that data. So we have that. There's also a model called UrbanPop, that's for urban population movements. So we've also looked into that. And I started doing all that integration to get from NHTS and UrbanPop into Transims to get that set up, but it takes a lot of work and we ran out of funding. So hoping for more.
The funding is always
that's what I talked about, that we ran out of funding, and if there is a potential collaboration, then definitely we are happy to collaborate on that.
But let's close the loop here, because basically, if you're going to get into walking, biking, or even all those micro mobility things, your first part in terms of cold weather, in terms of rain, in terms of all those things becomes more of an issue, and you know, you probably find more a stronger relationship about how trips and all that get affected when you get to that level. So I think it's very promising. So yeah, we got lots of good students here, and you know, I'm glad you're working with UT Chattanooga, but UT Knoxville is closer, and we have a lot of power here. So
yes,
I'd like to see more of a collaboration there.
Yeah, and there's also computer sim for mode choice, and I think that can take weather as one of the inputs. So that's also something that we were planning on doing, and that was going to be one of Kuldeep's brainchild,
Assignment.
I think, but we didn't get to do it yet.
Could be someone's dissertation somewhere. Yeah. Okay, any other question? We're running already past the 5:45 timeline. I really appreciate your time, Dr. Kurte, and also your colleagues attending this seminar. And this is probably going to get more views once we post it out, because the time is different from our usual time. It's cutting to later in the day. And I really appreciate also Chen Liu, Dr. Liu's making this arrangement. So thank you very much. Well, hopefully this will lead to more collaboration and communication, certainly. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thank you so much for the invitation. It was a good opportunity for me to showcase what we do and exchange ideas with you people. You actually, transportation people, we are data driven and machine learning people. We try to adopt different ideas and try to apply these different approaches to these domains. So we will have more opportunity to learn from you guys. Yeah.
Thank you very much. So we'll make more appointment about next week's. Actually, there's invitation out for next week's special talk for new graduate students. So we'll not have a special speaker, but then I'll give you more information about the talk later for the seminars. Thank you again, Dr. Kurte, and thank you, everyone. We'll close the seminar now. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.